So the learning approach, social learning theory. So as I said, learning approach is umbrella term that includes behavioural and social learning theory. So this is going to look at your social learning aspect. So you need to be aware of the assumptions of social learning theory, imitation, identification, modelling, vicarious reinforcement, and the role of meditational processes and Bandura's research. So there's quite a lot of AO1 that you need to be aware of. So the assumptions is that people learn behaviour through observation and imitation of others. Learning happens through indirect reinforcement. So people aren't directly reinforced. They're not given rewards themselves. And this can happen through vicarious reinforcement, which is where you observe someone else being reinforced for their behaviour. So you're more likely to copy that behaviour because they have been rewarded for it. So identification and imitation. Identification with a role model is important, and children are more likely to imitate and identify with someone of a similar age or gender, or that someone that has a higher status than them. So it could be like a teacher, a police officer, or a celebrity. Now that process is called modelling, and modelling is more likely to happen if the behaviour is seen to be rewarded, vicarious reinforcement. Imitation is slightly different. That usually involves copying a single behaviour. Now the meditational processes, so remember the acronym of ARM, ARMM. So attention, they needed to have paid attention, they needed to have noticed the behaviour. R, retention, they need to have remembered that behaviour that they have observed. Motor reproduction, they need to have the ability to perform that same behaviour. So it could be the same motor skills, the same cognitive skills to replicate that behaviour. And motivation, what will make them repeat that behaviour? Was that behaviour rewarded or was it punished? So if it was rewarded, they are more likely to repeat that behaviour, they'll be more motivated to do it. If they saw the behaviour be punished, they are less likely to repeat that behaviour. Now, Bandura's research. So his aims was to see whether children would imitate aggressive models. So whether they saw an adult be aggressive and would they replicate that. Procedure, children aged 3 to 6 years, 36 boys and 36 girls were divided into groups. One group was exposed to an adult model who showed aggression. The second group were observed a non-aggressive behaviour, and the third group was a control group who didn't see any model. In the first two groups, some observed the same sex model and some watched an opposite sex model in the behaviours. So they found that children who observed the aggressive models were more aggressive, both physically and verbally. A third of the children who observed the aggressive model repeated the model's verbal response, while none of the children who observed the non-aggressive model made verbal aggressive remarks. So it was concluded that children who was shown the aggressive model were more likely to imitate it. So therefore they demonstrated signs of observational learning, vicarious reinforcement. Children were also more likely to imitate the same-sex adult. So the idea that gender is an important factor in the role model and identification. So, for example, a 6 marker here, a psychologist carried out a study of social learning. As part of the procedure, he showed children aged 4 to 5 a film of a 4-year-old boy stroking a puppy. Whilst children watched the film, the psychologist commented on how kind the boy was. After the children had watched the film, the psychologist brought a puppy into the room and watched to see how the children would behave. Outline what is meant by social learning theory and explain how social learning theory might occur in this procedure. So what is social learning theory? Social learning theory is the idea that we learn behaviour through indirect reinforcement. We are more likely to repeat a behaviour if we have seen a role model be rewarded for that behaviour, vicarious reinforcement. So how does this relate to this? So in the procedure, they observed the actions of the boy. The psychologist exposed the children to the role model, the boy. If he is of the same age, it would encourage identification with that role model, particularly also if the children who had watched the film were also male. They would be of the same gender. That would enhance identification even more. After exposure, the children would model and imitate the boy's behaviour, such as stroking the puppy. The psychologist commenting on how kind the boy was would be vicarious reinforcement. Therefore, they would be motivated to replicate that behaviour. So in terms of evaluation, supporting evidence, so it can help explain why behaviours aren't always universal and there can be cultural differences. So eating disorders, so quite a famous study. So there was when in Fiji they were introduced to American television programs which emphasised Western viewpoints of an ideal body shape. So thinness was emphasised and rewarded. They found an increase in eating disorders. So it can help explain why there are cultural differences in behaviours, and behaviours aren't always universal. It's, in comparison to other approaches, it's less deterministic than the behaviourist approach. So it recognises that we have some free will. So the idea of soft determinism, that just because we have been exposed to a stimulus and response doesn't mean that we will behave in that way. So we have some free will over our action. However, it's quite oversimplistic, it's environmentally reductionist, so it ignores the role of biological factors such as the role of testosterone in aggression. So males could, and boys in Bandura's research, could be more aggressive due to the role of testosterone. Now it is useful, it has real world applications. So when we looked at aggression, we talked about the idea of understanding criminal behaviour, and Phillips found that homicide rates increased a week after a boxing match. So it's useful in helping to explain behaviours like that and identify patterns and trends where we might have to put more police force or interventions into place. In terms of testability, we have lab experiments. So the high control of extraneous variables increases internal validity. We're able to make cause and effect conclusions. However, demand characteristics is a weakness. So some children behaved how they were expected to behave. In an interview or a follow-up after the debrief, one of the kids said when they entered the room with a Bobo doll, they were like, "Oh, there's the doll we're meant to hit." So does the study support it, or was it demand characteristics? Were children behaving how they felt they had to behave during the experiment? Discuss 2 limitations of social learning theory, so 3 marks per each. So do your point, evidence, explain, and a link if you can. Outline and evaluate social learning theory, refer to evidence in your answer. So again, remember your third should be AO1. So your AO1 paragraph, first paragraph talking about the idea of the assumptions, vicarious reinforcement. Imitation is more likely to happen when role model is of the same gender or similar age, or they have a high status, such as celebrities. I'm going to talk about the idea of the meditational processes, so the acronym of ARM, attention, retention, motor reproduction, and motivation, and description of those, and the idea of vicarious reinforcement in there. Then your second AO1 paragraph can be Bandura's research, so some key facts about the Bobo doll study. Then moving on to your evaluation, so 3 to 4 evaluation points in that.